Today we're here to discuss mobile device security, and this is really a topic where if you don't get ahead of the curve, you could end up in the same situation we're in with cloud computing, meaning people are doing it anyways, CFOs are deploying these technologies anyways, and for mobile devices it's even worse because it's not simply a CFO pressure as with cloud computing, but users are bringing devices onto your corporate network, and you may or may not know that they exist. So the fact of the matter is, for most of you within the audience, you're dealing with mobile devices, and your mobile device management policy and your mobile device management deployment tools are simply a recognition of what's already going on within your network. Before we get started, I do want to just discuss with you, there are a couple of ways that you can deploy a mobile device management technical solution. And the different technical solutions actually impact your legal position. Predominantly, the various different solutions fall into either containers or items that want to create a secure corporate space on the device. The primary vendor for that type of solution is Good Technologies. There are others, but it is the primary vendor that I see within my contracting practice. Or there are solutions which are mobile device management suites, where individuals or organizations could actually manage various different elements on a device, like on the whole device, which is enforcing password policies, removing capabilities like picture capabilities or screenshot capabilities from a phone, removing applications from a phone, and really enforcing policies over the entire device. Now, that mobile device management software policy type of application could be deployed in tandem with a container or by itself. The primary vendor that I see for these MDM policy softwares is AirWatch. However, this is an area where we are dealing with vendors at the moment that are rather dispersed, and we have a number of specialty niche vendors. So for those of you who have large organizations out there, some of which are in foreign subs, make sure that the vendor that you're choosing is either large enough to withstand the type of breach that you would anticipate, or they have sufficient data privacy insurance in order to do so. Because what you find in the niche provider environment, that you're going to select a vendor and they may not have the reps and warranties that you need for your organization. Now I have a roadmap that we're going to look at very quickly, and we're just basically going to use it to guide our discussions today. I'm going to talk briefly about the various tensions with putting together a mobile device management policy, the categories of devices, and the legal background when you are dealing with a mobile device management policy. And then we'll move into specific issues, and then from there we'll talk about, well, what do you really do and how do you really resolve those issues. And I have a few slides on it. It says sample policy, but really it's a sample framework for a policy. And for those of you who are interested, I can certainly provide you with a sample policy. And my email address is Mushahwar, Mushahwar @reedsmith.com. Now, on to the first slide. What I like about this slide is where you have the history of man, we're dealing with thousands of years and centuries. But in the mobile phone environment, we're really dealing with the past 20 to 15 years. And we've went all the way from phones that used to comprise the entire trunk of vehicles to the smartphone devices that we have now. As an outside counsel for Fortune 500 companies, small to mid-sized companies, I'll tell you I've seen the gamut of mobile device management policies or just old mobile policies in need of being updated. So keep in mind that here we're dealing with as you know, a very, very recent history. But even if your policy is 2 years, 3 years, or 10 years old, it's quite likely going to be dated given the emergence of smartphones and given the emergence of tablets. So when you deploy your mobile device management policy and program, don't immediately think that your employee handbook can withstand it or your existing mobile training can withstand it. You are going to have to revisit these policies and you're going to have to revisit these training materials. On to the next slide. The one thing I think that we need to keep, on the forefronts of our mind is that we're not in a mobile device management policy, a bring your own technology policy, or bring your own device. We're not going to have one uniform device. There's going to be a number of different types of devices, Android clone, iPhone, tablet, depending upon what you're going to allow into your network. And then there's going to be various states of ownership of those devices that will impact your legal liability. The first state of ownership is corporate-owned, stringently managed devices. Those are devices that regard your board personnel, your IT personnel. They're going to be heavily locked down devices where you can control the content going on in those devices. Then you're going to have corporate-owned, loosely managed devices, or devices that anticipate an element of personal and professional use, but they're still owned by your company. And then you're going to have devices purchased by your employees. And on this last category on the slide, I really could have two elements of it. One being devices purchased by employees but reimbursed, and devices purchased by employees and that are not reimbursed. Keep these categories in mind when you're developing your mobile device management policy, because there's going to be different liability considerations. For example, if the device is corporate owned, there is a less ability for someone to claim that they had a right to personal privacy on a device, because you know and understand that you were provided a piece of corporate equipment. What we're going to be dealing with today is going to be all about asserting under employment law circumstances, privacy circumstances, and security circumstances. Where does the zone of employee personal privacy end and our ability as an organization to enforce policy and obtain documents begin? And to answer that question, we're going to be deploying MDM policies, BYOT, BYOD policies, with an understanding that we're amassing evidence to counteract that employee's right to personal privacy. On the next slide, another important point for us to mention in the legal scheme is that we have the exact same legal circumstances overlaid into a mobile environment. We don't have a situation where we have retooled laws that are specifically to mobile security. We still have HIPAA, GLB, PCI DSS, vendor contractual capabilities, FISMA, and other state laws and data breach notification laws that we must abide by that do not distinguish among the technologies. The difficulty that we have as privacy and security professionals, however, is that we know there are known security flaws in the mobile environment. So what you're going to have to do as an organization is dialogue and understand where you can't meet your security goals, or you cannot abide by your existing security policies in a mobile environment. I had a client that I recently went through a change order request with the PCI DSS Council on a specific mobile device management issue. And our clients were cognizant enough to alert us to this issue, and then we were able to go back and help them document how they could nearly get there with privacy and security controls, and then get the necessary approval they need from the PCI DSS Council so they wouldn't receive a violation fine in the event that they're caught or they suffer a breach. So it's understanding your obligations and getting the security controls in place for the mobile environment to either meet those obligations or understand precisely where you don't meet them and get an appropriate change control in place. Now on to the next slide. We've talked about this a little, but one thing that you'll be doing when you develop a mobile device management policy or bring your own technology policy is really understanding where your technical tension is. If you have too much security, your employees are just going to find ways to circumvent the technology. Whereas if you have too little security, it is a technical free-for-all. We want to get ourselves in some type of happy medium user situation where we are as regulatory compliant as we can be, but yet still allowing users to be able to use their phones in a manner that's technically feasible for them. Just a few things that my clients have found give them problems is that, let's say they're locking down a document container so much that an individual cannot access documents unless they're online in a secure container. Well, many executives want to be able to access documents on a mobile device when you're in an airport or in a plane or in some type of situation where you don't have mobile access and you don't have a wireless network. Well, what happens there? And emails just get forwarded to personal accounts and then get downloaded on the device. So we have to find happy mediums for use case scenarios that really can be anticipated. Now on to the next slide. We also are going to have a legal tension. Going back to this issue, employees have a personal right to privacy for the communications on their personal device or on corporate devices where personal use is anticipated. You as IT professionals working in tandem with your legal groups can disclaim and amass evidence to combat that personal right of privacy and to use information that you need to use in the context of litigation and going through your e-discovery obligations. But the key is really for you to consider the use cases and to consider the entire life cycle of communications and what communications you would need to get at if you were in a litigation situation. Would you need personal phone calls, personal texts, personal app usage, cloud storage provider use, personal content downloads? Given this ongoing intermingling between corporate and personal communications, you must design your MDM policies with the assumption that you're going to have to ferret out personal versus corporate communications. You can't just set up a secure document locker and think that you're going to be okay with MDM. Okay, on to the next slide. Now I'm going to talk about specific issues that I've encountered when deploying mobile device management policies, and most of these regard deployment over very large enterprise and networks or large mid-sized networks. But there's a few general considerations that can be for every type of space. First of all, just for the common bring your own technology, bring your own device security concerns, the common ones are that email may be cut and pasted onto a secure location off of a company server. iPhone screenshots, iPhone cut and paste. The second one is email and documents can be forwarded to a personal account and then opened up on the device, stored on the device, and then usually stored in a document cloud service where there's very little representations and warranties as to data loss prevention. And then devices can become infected with mobile malware. Primarily it's the Android device. There is mobile malware problems over the other platforms, but primarily we're talking about the Android platform. And on to the next slide, we also have bring your own technology, bring your own device, intellectual property concerns. And before we talk about the last two bullets with concerns, I'm also going to just briefly mention that intellectual property can also be used as a carrot in addition to just having concerns with it. Your employees may not take you seriously with regard to privacy and security. You've heard it all before, your company might not have suffered a breach, it's just not as much of a concern for the organization. However, your employees will understand and typically understand intellectual property. And they typically understand that intellectual property is tied to their paychecks, and that leakage of intellectual property or even proprietary data can directly result in profitability losses for your company. So use IP as an excuse to get people on board with mobile device management. Now, in addition to using IP as a carrot, you really also have a catch-22. As security professionals, we want to lock down devices. We want to log everything. We want to know the moment that there's an intrusion. However, with intellectual property concerns, the moment one logs all of the information and then goes back to have it automated and audited, even if this is done on a real-time basis, as an organization, you are now imputed with that knowledge. So as an organization, would you have a responsibility to police ongoing copyright infringements and violations and jailbreaking? Within your organization, that's something for you to consider, because this could be a heavy management issue if you're going to fully police intellectual property within your organization. There are elements short of fully policing intellectual property concerns that you can do that will connote lesser liability to your enterprise. But, when discussing security, also make sure to loop back with your attorneys regarding IP. Now, in addition to these larger concerns, I'm just going to briefly mention a laundry list of topical issues that we've encountered and things that you have to consider in your own BYOD, mobile device, or BYOT policy. Those being employee overtime, phone usage while driving, authentications, how many user authentications and password entering will you have? Will you deploy an MDM software solution or a containerized solution? Device wiping, will you need a full device erasure, or do you have the ability to primarily segregate data and only erase corporate data? Keep in mind, when you're looking at device wiping, there might be corporate liability for deletion of employee personal material, and there have been cases on this. Then you'll look at the level of audit control. How much information do we want to impute regarding these devices to our organization? We have geolocation concerns in the event that you have some geolocation functionalities turned on and logged with your mobile device management tool. On the security end, you'll want to look at encryption, which is encryption on the device, encryption of content, encryption of virtual environments, if your organization is using a virtual environment. You'll want to look at application purchasing. Are you going to whitelist, blacklist, or use a company store? We've discussed malware and viruses, and then you'll also need to think about cloud services and e-discovery. E-discovery is a huge issue once you open up mobile devices, because to the extent that corporate communications are occurring on a device, then you'll want to make sure that you have the same ability to retrieve those corporate communications and retrieve any evidence of malfeasance in the event that you need it, and satisfy your e-discovery obligations. Now that we've mentioned all of these issues, and I could think of many, many more, we just are time limited, we should also figure out how we're going to address these issues. And then this next slide has a diagram of the technical addressing, which I'm largely going to leave to the vendors in the audience today. And we're going to focus on addressing the legal issues. And how I see we would address the legal issues is my clients normally have on the device a click-through mobile device management policy that's very short, less than a page, so it's less than a page to 2.5 pages over an iPhone or smaller device. They're addressing MDM in their employee handbook, which is signed, and they're deploying a short user training element. Now, when I'm talking user training, I'm not talking about expensive in-person training. You can have remotely deployed training tools, and I've even had one of my clients, once the user would accept the click-through agreement, a short 10-minute training video was instantly deployed to the phone. And that was a very quick way for them to get the message out in a meaningful manner. And then once you've done this ramp up with the policies and the training and the click-through consent, you want to periodically have that corporate communications where you're putting statements on the corporate intranet, you're pushing out emails as you do well within your organization already for your privacy and security programs. Just keep at the forefront of your mind, we're going to integrate MDM in our corporate communications, and we're going to deploy a corporate communications campaign with our existing privacy and security measures that reinforce our MDM policy periodically. Because what you don't want to have happen is you would deploy all of these materials, then a year or two later people really forget about them. You want to keep MDM, privacy, and security on the forefront of your employees' minds. And that's all that I have for today. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Again, I stated my email address earlier in the program, but it's Mushahwar, Mushahwar @reedsmith.com, or my contact information is on the very last slide of the slide deck. Happy to answer any questions. I'm also happy to provide at least a sample MDM click-through policy if your organization is interested. Thank you very much and have a lovely morning.